Healthcare and education and jobs have made budgeting, well, harder than ever before. That's why the Illinois General Assembly and I doubled down on fiscal responsibility. Unlike the federal government, we are balancing our budget for the benefit of your families, while Trump spends wildly to benefit his family and their Doge Bro friends. From the time that I took office 6.5 years ago to today, Trump's proposed spending increases have been 33% more than Illinois'. He's cutting health care and food for children and seniors and moms and dads, while Illinois prioritizes them. Despite all the headwinds from Republicans in Congress and from the White House, Illinois' fiscal year 2026 budget contains a slate of core investments in the future of our communities, including economic development, education, and healthcare. A few key highlights I'm very proud to share with all of you. We're growing our investments in education from childcare to K-12 to community colleges and universities. We're continuing to reduce the burden of healthcare costs on 250,000 working families so far with our medical debt relief program. We're helping communities create shovel-ready sites for new homes and businesses with our Surplus to Success program. And we're improving our long-term fiscal health by shoring up our Tier 2 pensions with a $78 million reserve fund for the Social Security wage-based safe harbor. We're protecting our taxpayers and state workers from future shortfalls that could cost the state much more. Beyond the headlines, the budgetary process was not about horse trading or insider politics or partisan bickering. This budget was focused from start to finish on the people of Illinois. Our deliberations required compromise and tough decisions, especially in these uncertain and turbulent times. But we got the job done for the future of our state and for the well-being of Illinoisans. For the families who now can access high-quality childcare and preschool, we got the job done. For the workers who can now afford to get back to school to get a higher-paying job. For the main streets in small towns that are being revitalized by our economic and community development grants. For the vulnerable children that need the safety and care that a well-resourced child welfare system can provide. Those are the folks who this process is for. And I'm very proud to say that we delivered for them in this budget. I look forward to taking your questions in a moment, but first let me introduce a passionate champion for working families, our great Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, everyone, and happy June. First and foremost, I want to thank Governor Pritzker for continuing to strengthen Illinois' financial landscape. Every year, you exemplify what it means to lead with empathy and accountability, and it's an honor to serve by your side. To President Harmon, Speaker Welch, the budgeteers, and members of the General Assembly, thank you for rolling up your sleeves and coming together to get this work done for our people. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, perseverance, and passion. And to so many, including my team in the Office of the Lieutenant Governor and all of the staffers who pulled long hours to make sure we stayed on track, thank you for your service. To echo the Governor, as we gather this morning, let's take a moment to consider the magnitude of what we've accomplished. Illinois is setting a national example of effective, fiscally responsible governance. There's nothing easy about passing a state budget in this climate that addresses the diverse needs of Illinoisans. And thanks to Trump's recklessness and disdain for the American people, we knew this would be a particularly challenging year. We walked into session aware that the Trump administration had already littered our path with pitfalls and unexpected obstacles. True to the soul of our state, though, Illinois leaders committed to working through our differences. We asked difficult questions and had hard conversations on behalf of the people who need us most. And as a result, we can celebrate the passage of our 7th consecutive balanced budget. While the President of the United States prioritizes the dreams of the ultra-wealthy and toys with the stability of middle-class families and global markets, Illinois is doubling down on compassionate fiscal responsibility. We are making powerful investments to improve quality of life and maintaining our long-term financial health without raising taxes on working families. Let's do a little comparison, shall we? In Illinois, the Pritzker-Stratton budget includes protections for Illinois patients and independent pharmacists against predatory pharmacy benefit managers, expanded reproductive rights on public university campuses, and millions of dollars each invested into expanding early childhood education, making college more affordable, historic site readiness initiatives to attract businesses, shrinking food deserts, reproductive health initiatives, tackling housing insecurity, and gun violence reduction programs. Meanwhile, in D.C., the Trump-Vance budget includes $1.5 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest 5% of Americans, paid for by working families. And how are they doing that? Stripping 14 million Americans from health insurance by gutting Medicaid and taking food out of the mouths of almost 11 million Americans by slashing SNAP and food assistance. While congressional Republicans trip over themselves to claw at Trump's coattails and kick our most vulnerable Americans in the teeth while they go, Illinois is bracing to defend our home. And because we spent the last 7 years rebuilding and strengthening our financial landscape and earning back the trust of our people, we're in the best position to weather whatever hateful storm Trump sends our way. We are showing you right now what it looks like when leaders value the humanity of all more than the wallets of a few. And while there's still work to be done, I'm so proud to be a part of an administration that chooses to stand on the front lines with our people. Thank you so much again, everyone, for your work. And with that, I am happy to pass it over to Senate President Don Harmon. Mr. President?
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Governor. Last night, we approved a good budget for what will be a most challenging year. I applaud the governor for his leadership. The budget we adopted was very close to the budget the governor introduced a few months ago. And again, it is a responsible, balanced budget. I will tell you that I think when we look back on this period of time, Governor, the fact this is the longest sustained, responsible budgeting period in my lifetime. We have stayed the course, we have stayed true to that, all while investing in our values, education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for working families. So I'm proud to stand with you, Governor. I appreciate your leadership, appreciate the partnership among the House, the Senate, and the Governor's office in passing a good budget in a very difficult year. Governor?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy to take any questions from members of the media. Olivia. Well, I'd remind you, Olivia, that there are a lot of one-time expenditures that occur in a budget as well. And so what we tried to do was make sure that any one-time revenues that you're referring to really matched up with or, were diminishing of the one-time expenditures that we have to make. So we've gotten really much closer than ever before to balancing that structural deficit, to getting rid of the structural deficit. As you remember, when I came into office, we did a study in early 2019 that showed a structural deficit of $3.2 billion. And we have whittled away at that year after year after year. And the fact is that we're getting closer and closer. We've been, I think, prudent this year about making cuts to government where we thought we could, and there are hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts that we made, while at the same time addressing needs that we knew that we had to. One last thing, just to remind everybody about the state budget. As you know, there was an Edgar ramp put in back in the mid-90s to deal with pensions, right? It increases the amount that goes into pensions from the state budget roughly by $400 to $500 million a year. Add on top of that we have the evidence-based funding model that requires about $350 million, 300 to schools, every single year in addition to the existing budget. So you start really $800 million in the hole, so to speak, as you're trying to balance the budget every year from year to year. And so we have that to take into account. So when people talk about increased spending from one year to another, you're already talking about $800 million, and there's more, interest and other factors that are, as we say, above the line. Yeah, hi, Isabel. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. You don't get everything done in 1 year. I think that maybe the Senate president would back me up on that, and lots of people in the General Assembly. Sometimes they spend 2 years, 4 years, 6 years trying to get something big done. I think we've been hyper successful at getting things done in a shorter period of time than are expected. I have said for a long time about the community college bill, for example, that this was introduced back when Andy Menard was Senator Menard, and years before he came to work for our administration. He was, I think, the Senate sponsor at one point. And so this is, years old, and something that it takes a lot of work to get people together on. Energy, let's take that as an example. CEJA was about 1.5 years in the making, longer really if you take all the pre-work that was done, but 1.5 years in working groups to try to get all the various interests at the table and try to address their concerns in order to put together a package that everybody felt was going to address the problem that we had in the state. So things take sometimes longer than one session to get done. I don't know that that's possible. I met with an awful lot of members. I mean, I certainly can, continue to find time for people whenever they want. But no, I meet with an awful lot of organizations and individuals, and enjoy those individual meetings. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 at a time, sometimes one, sometimes with whole caucuses. But it's important to me to have a good relationship, not only within the Democratic caucuses, but also on the other side of the aisle. Sometimes we don't agree on things, but it's good to have dialogue.
Governor, can you reflect on transit not getting across the finish line? And there was a proposal that was in the amendment yesterday that would have put a delivery fee on transit across the whole state. Would you support something like that?
I didn't introduce the proposals that would have paid for the transit bill, and didn't see them actually till until all of you saw them maybe 1.5 days before they were introduced on the floor yesterday. I can say this, that we need transit reform. We need to make sure we're addressing the needs of commuters, and not just in the city of Chicago or in Cook County or in the collar counties, but all across the state. I think you've heard me say that every single time I've talked about transit, that the entire state relies upon transit, and so whatever solution we have has to address them. And I have to give some credit to the people who are working in those working groups, that they took that seriously, and there was a significant focus on the amount of money that would go to downstate transit systems. So I'll continue to work with them. We were not the leaders of that endeavor, but we were at the table listening and helping whenever we were asked to. And again, I think there's significant work that will need to be done over the summer and in the fall to make sure that it gets across the line.
Just to follow up, though, you a few days ago talked about you would not support broad-based tax increases. They were about sales and corporate and income, but a delivery tax, a lot of people get deliveries on Amazon or DoorDash. That would hit a lot of people. Would that fall into that category of a broad-based tax that you would support?
Well, again, I think, when I think of the broad-based taxes in the state, I think of the largest, sources of tax revenue, and those are income tax, the individual income tax, the corporate income tax, the sales tax. I obviously want to make sure we're lowering, not raising taxes whenever we can. And so, again, I think the decisions that will get made at the working group table over the next bunch of months, and that'll get surfaced. I hope we'll get response. I hope Republicans will help. They have not helped so far with, what sources of revenue might help to address the transit challenges that, their communities, the Republicans that live in their areas, the Democrats that live in their communities, need them to step up to the plate too.
Governor,
Dan.
as things are wrapping up here in Springfield, federal prosecutors recommended a 12.5-year prison sentence for former Speaker Mike Madigan. They talked about the stain his record left on government, and in their filings, they talked about the letters of support he received from current and former government officials that are still strong allies, despite the evidence of his illegal conduct. And yet, here in Springfield, the House never held its promised hearings on ethics legislation. And what we saw from the Senate was a 11-hour proposal that appeared designed to address an issue that the Senate president had with his campaign finances in the state board election. It would have allowed the lieutenant governor and others who are running for federal office to fundraise on session days outside of Sangamon County. Why weren't ethics a stronger priority this session? And why haven't things like a stronger revolving door provision and more transparency about what's spent on lobbying in Springfield, which are common across the country, why aren't those on the agenda here?
I think you're aware that nearly every year that I've been governor, we have addressed ethics. I talked about it a lot with regard, for example, to the utilities that have been accused in those cases that you're referring to. I think in 2020, in my State of the State speech, I talked about the fact that we're not going to let utility companies make decisions for the majority of people in the state of Illinois. They're not going to be the ones who are directing the legislation that addresses energy, but rather, that the voices of the people would be heard. And that happened, and indeed we included within CEJA ethics legislation. People don't pay a lot of attention to that. They think that ethics legislation has to sit as a separate thing, but actually within a lot of the major issues that we're addressing, we address ethics. So, I think that, once again, ethics hugely important to me. We try to address them whenever we can. We had a very busy session. There were, in fact, discussions with, with the chair of the committee in the House anyway about his ideas for this. So we're going to continue to address it wherever we can, and I don't think you can ever stop talking about how do you make sure that we have a corruption-free and an honest government.
But you talked about corruption.
Yeah.
Illinois still has among the lowest credit rating in the country. Republicans say it's not Donald Trump's fault. Why are they wrong?
Oh, they're not wrong. Donald Trump didn't cause the problem that occurred before Donald Trump became president in 2017, rather. Illinois was already getting, I think, in the 20 years before I became governor, Illinois, I think, had 21 credit downgrades consistently, not a single credit upgrade. And 8 of those occurred during my predecessor's term. So, this has been a problem for many, many, many years. So I've never blamed the credit challenges that the state of Illinois has had on Donald Trump. I blame a lot of other things on Donald Trump. I mean, he has made it difficult for working families in Illinois, and now even worse than ever before as a result of the budget that he's proposing.
And then to follow up, how does this budget help the state catch up with the rest of the country, which traditionally lagged the country economic rebound after recession, after COVID? So what in this budget is actually going to make us competitive?
I'm so glad you asked that question. As you know, Greg, I've made it a hallmark of our administration and worked very closely with the General Assembly to try to speed up economic growth in the state by making the kinds of investments that are required for us to leap ahead, right? We are a traditional economy that's got a large agriculture sector, a large manufacturing sector. Those sectors, hugely important, and we want to make sure we maintain those and grow those. But we also need to make sure we have some very high growth sectors that we're investing in, and that we're doing everything we can to make Illinois a welcoming state for businesses that want to move, whether they want to move from one place in the United States to another, or businesses that are outside of the country and want to move to the United States. So, example, the Surplus to Success program that is in the budget, that's a program where we're taking state-owned properties. We're talking about prisons that have been closed, facilities that have been owned but closed many years ago, that just sit idle and frankly rotting in their communities, and to try to either reform the properties themselves so that they're saleable and usable, or to tear down whatever's there and make sure that, you know, we've got, because remember, these are properties that have utilities, they've got water, they've got power, these are all the things that a business is looking for often when they move to Illinois, and more of those properties available in great communities like Lincoln, the better off we are. And so that's an example, but I could go through many examples for you about how the General Assembly has introduced, and we've worked with them on this, incentives to bring businesses to the state. So that is something we work on all the time. I think great news for people in Illinois, in part, is that when there's a downturn, Illinois really doesn't suffer quite as much often as other places, in part because we have a very stable and quite diverse economy as compared to some other places. You see a state like, I don't know, I guess I'd pick Oklahoma, where, you know, they're dependent on oil and gas. And if the oil and gas economy is terrible, their state is in terrible shape. In Illinois, you can weather the storm in one industry or another because we have such a diverse economy. We want to continue that way, but also make investments in biotechnology and quantum technology and things that will, I think, leapfrog us ahead of other states. Mike.
Lawmakers approved a delay of the prohibition on the tax for the swipe fees. Why was that done? Is it because of the legal challenges that are happening right now with the interchange fees?
I think that's right. I think I can't tell you it was not my initiative, but I can say I think there were, you know, this is still sitting in the courts. I think the uncertainty is probably why it was brought up, but I think it was only a 1 year, as I recall, a 1 year push of the implementation date. So, you know, this will be something that will probably get resolved over the next year.
Can you talk about the bridge fund that was created? Because I know that's something unique instead of using the rainy day fund, or why was that done?
Yeah, so the bridge fund is really, think about the challenges that we saw in February from the Trump administration, when all of a sudden the systems that operate Medicaid, the systems that operate Head Start, were shut down by DOGE or by the Trump administration. We don't exactly know who did it. But in that period of time, and they had intended to keep them shut off for some time, but the hue and cry from around the country, you know, had them turn it back on. But that doesn't mean they're not going to come back at it. And so what we wanted to do is to have a bridge fund, for example, to deal with a situation like that. We've seen this kind of chaos out of the federal government that causes real dislocation for people, for working families in Illinois, and we want to try to keep those, you know, level and available, those services for working families, and the bridge fund allows us to do that. Yeah, Jeremy.
Bears have said that any move to Arlington Heights would be contingent on legislation that would basically allow them to negotiate, you know, property tax assessments with local municipalities. How would you feel about a plan like that? And are you aware of any legislation that passed through the spring session or in the final days of the spring session to that effect for the Bears?
I mean, as you know, just on a personal level, I would like them to stay in the city of Chicago. I think you know that. Having said that, this is a private business. They'll choose to do what they like. Yeah, there's legislation that I've seen. I don't think that anything, at least, you know, not that I'm aware of anything passed that would address that right away. But I'm quite interested to make sure that, not for the Bears, but for developments all across the state of Illinois, that we have available things like, this is not directed at the Bears, but star bonds, which is a great idea when implemented properly, and it is being implemented properly in Marion, Illinois right now, but we think that's something that should happen across the state, and there are other proposals like that that we're all kind of anticipating. Again, this is about making this a business-friendly, job-friendly state, and not specifically about the Bears. Yeah. You know, we have a process in the state of Illinois. If you want to seek commutation or pardon, you go through a process. First, you apply through the Prisoner Review Board, and then the Prisoner Review Board makes a recommendation to the governor. They put together, though, during that process, and this is why it's so important, they put together a record where they're interviewing not only the incarcerated person, but also their family, if they have family or friends that speak on their behalf. The victims or the victims' families also are heard in that process, and record is kept of that and taken of that. And that whole record is put together. A recommendation is made by the Prisoner Review Board to me that includes that entire record, and I review the entire record when that happens. I have, as you know, had pardons and commutations, hundreds of them during the course of my administration, and every single one of them has involved that kind of a record.
Governor, back to
Yeah.
transit, RTA says they need money now. Is there enough time, like, to be able to send them a bailout and veto session before they would have cuts to service on buses and trains, and they would lay people off? Or do you think, in fact, a little chaos, service disruption might help both chambers agree on legislation?
I think the group should be working expeditiously to try to get to a conclusion on transit funding. I also would say that they'd have more money in their coffers if they hadn't spent money advertising here in Springfield to try to convince people of something that they really should be leaving to the legislators to decide. But the fact is that we need to address transit funding as fast as possible, and no doubt the legislators will be meeting over the course of the summer. Our office will be present in those and be helping in any way that we're asked to.
Your
Yeah.
budget spends roughly the same amount that, or the budget you're being spends roughly the same amount that you proposed. Do you believe that Conferly is prepared for potentially revenue being lower than was expected, since we've already seen revenue projections decline in the last few months?
Well, again, it's all a projection, right? And what we rely upon S&P as one of our advisors to tell us what is the economy likely to look like over the next year, and then you put that through an equation that helps you come up with the revenue to determine sales tax revenue and income tax revenue and so on. We've also seen J.P. Morgan and other large banks, economists lower their projections for the coming year. So we try to follow all of that and incorporate that into our budget projections. It's the best we can do. We have also people who work for state government that are expert, but we like to look at an awful lot of other information. So, we don't know. I mean, the answer is it's so chaotic. If you talk to business people, and I'm talking about Republicans and people who, Democrats and Republicans and people who voted for Donald Trump, right, who will tell you at a minimum in private, if not in public, that the chaos that they see, the uncertainty, the turbulence, is really causing them to kind of step back and wonder, where is this all going? Should I shut down a line that I have operating in my manufacturing facility because I'm not sure if those customers will be ordering because of the tariffs, for example, or not invest in the next line? And so that all is not good for the economy, and that's why the Trump slump is really having a terrible effect on income to states, not to mention, more importantly, businesses and jobs that people hold. All of that affects, again, revenue to a state or a local government.
Governor, what do you say to taxpayers waking up this morning saying, oh my gosh, they're going to get a full tax plunge, we didn't see the revenue bill, it's going to fly out. Deadline, the budget bill didn't come out until about 24 hours or so. But they're waking up this morning seeing the largest state spending plan in state history, $1 billion tax increase.
That's not true. So
What do you say to those who see that?
well, let me correct you for a moment. As you know, revenues for a state budget consist of a lot of different things. One of the things they consist of is collections, not new taxes, collections. And in this budget, half of that number, it comes from just collections that are owed to the state of Illinois. So, yes, but I'm also talking about, for example, there is a hospital assessment program that, right, where there's a payback from hospitals over the course of time. They owe us, and we are collecting from them in part as part of the revenue that you're referring to, and that the Republicans have been saying, oh, that's some kind of a tax increase. It's not a tax increase. These are literally, they're owed to the state of Illinois, and they have to be put into the budget as revenue, because that's what you remember the fake revenue that my predecessor put into, I think, 2 of his budgets where they were supposedly selling the Thompson Center, right? And that was revenue in his budget, $350 million, I think, for 2 years in a row. These are collections. It's not fake revenue, and they are not operating, taxes that are ongoing. So I just want to be clear with you about that. Second, my budget is not that much different. The budget that we passed, rather, yesterday, that the legislature passed, is not that much different than the budget that I introduced. So, the idea that anybody's pulling a fast one, I think it's pretty obvious that we have a state budget that's pretty stable, that we had a tough budget year, and so we made sure that we were moderating spending in the state. You'll see those hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts and keeping any increases down to sometimes 1% or even 0, wherever we felt we could.
Last one, guys, last one.
Going back to Olivia's question.
Yeah.
You're talking about
Oh, you guys are tag teaming now at the Tribune, yeah. And you got another one over there, yeah.
you're talking about revenue, and just does the state need to look at a more comprehensive long-term plan so that we don't have to balance the budget by doing things like pausing things that are important to you, like expanding preschool programs, taking away healthcare from undocumented immigrants?
Yeah, we need more stability out of Washington, D.C. is my answer to you. We would not have suffered this problem had we not had the Trump slump affecting us. There are $500 million of reduced revenues to the state of Illinois as a result of what Donald Trump has done to a booming economy. Thank you.
Governor, you're gonna